Hello, everyone, and welcome back once again to our Redeemer Lutheran Church Bible study on the book of Ecclesiastes. Today, Ecclesiastes chapter 9. I'm Pastor Eric Kleinschmidt from Redeemer Lutheran Church in Highland, Indiana. Today with Ecclesiastes 9, we have a very cheery section, which begins with the sort of summary title from the Bible editors of Death Comes to All. So it seems that Solomon is a little bit depressed, but perhaps not so much. We're going to see one of the most unique things that God tells humanity to do through the wisdom of Solomon in Ecclesiastes 9. So stick around for that. At the end, we're going to be given some practical advice about how to live counterculturally, which is nice to all of those of us who have always aspired to do that through different movements, those sorts of things. But if you've ever been a part of any subculture or countercultural movement, Ecclesiastes 9 is definitely going to speak to you at the end. So let's look at the text ourselves. Ecclesiastes 9, and you see here on BibleGateway.com, the free service that I use for a lot of my Bible needs on the computer, they've entitled this first section of Ecclesiastes 9, Death Comes to All. This is nothing new for readers of Ecclesiastes. We've seen before that Solomon is going to lay out the seemingly injustice that exists under the sun. And under the sun is code for everything that happens in this life. Okay, he's not talking about the eternal life that is yet to come. He's talking about all the terrible things that happen in this life, but also the good ones too. So when he talks about the injustice that he sees in this life, one of the great equalizers of everything, whether they're a righteous person or a wicked person, whether they're a king or a peasant, everybody dies. And so that is where he kind of comes to what's the point? If you were just living in this world, we're of little more value than ants because it doesn't matter. We live out our days and then we die and nobody remembers us and we don't change the world and all of that sort of stuff. At least that's the perspective if this is all that there is. And that certainly is the perspective of science and evolution and all that, which leads to a very dreary worldview and outlook. It also can't explain a whole lot of things, which is why I don't adopt that worldview. So when Solomon begins here, when he says, all this I laid to heart, what he's talking about is everything that he's written about in Ecclesiastes, particularly what he ended the last chapter talking about. So if we jump back to chapter 8 real quick, he says, when I applied my heart to know wisdom and see the business that is done on earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep, then I saw all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. We can't figure out why things in this life happen the way they do. They don't follow our ideas of how they should be or what we expect to happen next. However much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. Solomon is saying that life and understanding all the things under the sun is really beyond our comprehension, and that makes sense. If you need proof of that, just look at the weather. How many times do we, with all of our knowledge and all of our instruments and all of our scientific accuracy, get the weather wrong? Even if we can predict it, we cannot control it, right? So, and yes, okay, you can tell me about they can shoot chemicals into clouds and cause it to rain. That is a possibility, right? But we can't just make it be different. It's a cloudy day out there today. There is no way that I can just get rid of those clouds, okay? It is beyond my control. It's beyond my comprehension. We have a vague understanding of how weather patterns work. We've studied them and how they've operated in the past, but that doesn't mean that we really understand why they are that way or what happens when they change. Natural disasters happen all the time because they were unpredictable events. We might be able to warn people that they are occurring or that they might occur, but we can't pinpoint and say, all right, everybody get out of this town on next Tuesday at 3 p.m. because there's going to be an earthquake, okay? There's things that are beyond our comprehension and our control. Solomon says throughout his entire life and with all his wisdom, he realized it's always going to be that way. Now, a lot of humanity has a perception that if we just advance far enough in science and technology, that we will then be able to do exactly what I just described, pinpoint the exact location and time of some weather phenomenon that will be damaging or harmful to human life. I guess you might ascribe to that worldview. Good luck for you. But I think there will always be the unknowable because we are finite creatures. And I believe that there is an infinite God above that does know all things. And there will always be a distinction between the creator and the created, between the infinite and the finite. But that's just my opinion. So let's jump back to the text and come back. Solomon has says all of that. So all of his investigation, all of his wisdom, all of his experience, and everything he's written about before in Ecclesiastes, and I would argue also in Proverbs, comes to bear here. And he says, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God, whether it's love or hate, man does not know, both are before him. Now, God does not hate people, okay? He hates their sin, right? But he does not hate people. In fact, the Bible says exactly the opposite, that God so loved the world that he sent his only son, right? My son has been singing that nonstop because they learned it in preschool. So that's on my mind, John 3:16. But God loves all people. He does not want them to perish. So God does not hate. But from the perspective under the sun, it seems that the people that God should love and treat better than others, namely believers, often suffer the worst. Look at all the martyrs and people, the good people who do good things and bad things happen to them. You know those people. And the question is always, well, why doesn't God treat them better if they believe? And from the perspective of a human being, it seems like, well, yeah, some people God seems to love and other people God seems to hate, and it doesn't really make sense which are which. That's what Solomon is saying. But remember, that's only our perspective here under the sun. We can't see God's wisdom. We can't see what's going on. And in fact, Jesus told his followers to expect the cross, expect persecution, because the world in which you live is upside down. It's infected with sin. And so it will always see righteousness as bad, and it will try to stamp that out. That's the existence of us living in this upside down world until Christ comes again. This world and everything in it will pass away, and Christ will create a new heavens and a new earth where everything is finally set right, including people, which is good. And we'll talk about that, hopefully. So when we look at things under the sun, it doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason why things are that way, but they're in God's hands. And that's what Solomon is saying. Verse 2, it is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and to the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices, that is, who is faithful and goes to temple, and him who does not sacrifice, the apostate and the unbeliever. As the good one is, so is the sinner, and he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. Solomon is saying that this is the great equalizer, that life happens to everybody. And it doesn't seem to play favorites. Although we look at it and say that person is lucky or that person is charmed or blessed or whatever we want to say. It doesn't seem to be you put in A and you get B all the time. For some people, it definitely seems that way. They work hard and they do well, sure, great. But there's other people that we don't hear about that fail miserably. That they spend their entire life and life savings putting something together, and then it's wiped out by a random flood or something along those lines, or a random act of violence. That's all part of how we exist. So life, both good things and bad things, happen to all indiscriminately, right? And from our perspective, it doesn't seem that anybody is in control, that it's just chaos. Now, of course, that isn't Solomon's perspective. He believes that God is operating for all of it, and the New Testament tells us that God is operating for all those who love him and keep his commandments. That's actually from Exodus, but it's transposed into the New Testament as well. It's not just an Old Testament opinion that God was working for the good of his chosen people. No, God is also looking out for all of us, and we see that throughout the New Testament as well. That God has plans for us, that God is a kind heavenly Father that we can talk to in prayer, and that he is working for the good of all those who love him. Those sorts of things are present throughout the scriptures, Old Testament and New. And so that's Solomon's perspective, and that's taken for granted in chapter 9. You have to remember that Solomon is not writing to people who are unbelievers. Ecclesiastes is not really meant for someone who doesn't know about faith. Okay? Ecclesiastes is really written to those in the ecclesia, that is the church. Okay? He's writing to the faithful. And he's saying, like, you all know that it seems like God doesn't really control things. We believe he's up there and we know what he said, but man, sometimes it seems like he's not paying attention. Solomon's saying that's a very common perspective, and I share it, but let me give you the wisdom that says, well, yes, we believe that, we may not see that, but here's really what's going on. So Solomon in Ecclesiastes assumes certain things that you should know as a believer, and he doesn't need to keep reiterating and reminding you about, okay? It's a very different presentation from something like, say, the Gospel of John, John has a purpose in writing so that you would believe that this is the Christ whom God's people have waited for. Hebrews, kind of the same way. The author of Hebrews is kind of writing to Jews saying, you need to convert to Christianity because this is how the Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, fulfilled all these things that we had expected. Okay? That's their purpose. That's their audience. Ecclesiastes seems to be written more for a faithful audience that is having some real human questions, and Solomon knows that, and he's going to share his wisdom with us. And so that's why I think it's profitable for us to study today. All right. Verse 3, this is an evil. That means it's an injustice. It's not something that is right, okay, in all that is done under the sun. And the same event happens to all. Also, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil and injustice, and they seek to do that which is evil as well. Madness is in their hearts while they live. That word madness here doesn't mean that they're crazy and out of their mind. It really means that they're at war with themselves, that there is a discontent within the person, and there is irrational behavior. You know this about yourself, that you don't always like yourself very much. Most people struggle with that, in fact, which is kind of an odd thing when you think about existence and consciousness. You would think that if we're all out there to just survive, that you would be your favorite person all the time. We could understand pride and arrogance a lot better than we can understand depression and self-loathing, and yet that seems to be what many people struggle with, right? So right there is an example of how the world is upside down. From a scientific perspective, it doesn't make any sense. No species should hate itself or loathe itself or dislike itself. It doesn't really add up. It doesn't contribute to survival. And if evolution were a thing, that would have been weeded out a long time ago. So just it doesn't make sense that we have this madness, this discontent within our hearts, unless you understand that we've been corrupted, that we were religiously created good, and sin has affected that, including your mind and how you think and feel about yourself. There's a wonderful piece of, well, not wonderful, unfortunately. I keep it on a Post-it note to remind myself here, that I came across one time watching a video about psychology and that sort of thing. It says the brain produces on average 50,000 thoughts a day. 50,000 thoughts you have. Not necessarily about what you are doing at that moment, but just pieces of information that you come up with yourself, all right? 50,000 of them. However, on average, only about 10,000, so 1/5 of those are positive thoughts. So, for every positive thing that you think about, oh, this is a nice day, you think 4 terrible things. For every time you think, hey, I did a nice job on that, you're also thinking 4 things that you did wrong. And that's on average for all people. So that really shows me that we are infected and we are corrupt. And that's another reason why I look forward to the eschaton, the last thing, the new creation, because I won't be that at war with myself anymore. that madness that is described here in this verse won't be part of the new creation. And that's restful, I think, for all of us. Certainly as we continue discussions about mental health and things like that, it's something to look forward to. But until then, we're going to have to deal with that. For every good thought you have, you're going to have 4 bad ones. So what do you do? How do you live that way? Solomon says it's a great evil, and definitely understand that. There's madness in their hearts while they live, and after that, you die. So life sucks and then you die is Solomon's advice here. What a cheery chapter. But, and verse 4, we have this but, this exception, the flip side, the silver lining, if you will. Verse 4, but he who is joined with the living has hope. So, life sucks and then you die, but while you're living, that is still good. There's still something worthwhile in life. And he says a living dog is better than a dead lion. If you had to choose if you wanted to be a dog or a lion, most people, I think, worldwide would say, well, the lion is more noble, yes, more powerful and that sort of thing. So would probably choose the lion, but would you rather be a dead lion or a living dog? Or extend it out even further, would you rather be a dead lion or a living mouse or something like that? Well, life is better because the dead, they don't do anything, right? And that's what Solomon says next. Verse 5, for the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their time has come and passed. There's nothing there anymore. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished. So everything they did and cared about doesn't matter to them anymore. Forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. Now, this isn't annihilationism. You could take these verses out of context, where Solomon is saying that, after you die, there's nothing. Okay, it's an idea or a position called annihilationism. After we die, we're just nothingness. It's reflected in the scientific worldview that our atoms just return to the universe and that sort of thing. Okay, fine, whatever. But the idea that there's nothing after, you can't accuse Solomon of not believing in an afterlife, because other places he does write about that. Even David, his father, talked about that when David's son by Bathsheba died. He says, I will not go to, he will not come back to me, but I will go to where he is. Okay. It speaks about a life after death. That's not a new concept. In fact, the Sadducees in Jesus' time were particularly known because they rejected a resurrection or a life after death, okay? And that was seen as something bad, okay? And Jesus certainly speaks out against that himself. So Solomon is saying here that from the perspective under the sun, and you have to remember that he's saying if you leave God out of the equation really quick, and you just look at the world as it is, you're going to come to this conclusion. It's unfair, it sucks, then you die, and there's nothing. So what's the point of all this? The point of it is what Solomon assumes the believer knows, that there is a God up there who is in control, and that there is a life after death. There's more life to be lived after this. So Solomon assumes those things, but he's not expressly saying them in this chapter. And so we have to keep that in mind as we hear his words. Okay, so what do we do? This comes to it's pretty unique in especially this Solomonic literature, and I would say in the Bible too, because we've talked about this before, where earthly materialism seems to be decried throughout the scriptures and throughout religion today, and Ecclesiastes is one of the few places where God, through the words of Solomon, I am assuming and I believe, but through the author of whoever wrote Ecclesiastes, God is speaking through them, and he is saying that you should enjoy this life. And that seems to be contrary to what we have experienced elsewhere in the scriptures, where it's talking about don't live for this life, live for the life that is yet to come, set your heart on things above, you look forward to that day, the day of the Lord comes, those sorts of things. All of that language is pointing us to the then and there existence of eternity and saying kind of don't worry so much about the here and now. Ecclesiastes seems to flip that especially in chapter 9, where it just says we all die and then there's nothing. All right. That's not exactly what he means, as we just discussed, but that's what he says. And he's saying, live for now. It's okay. And here in chapter 9, verse 7, you actually, in the Hebrew, have imperatives. Imperatives are direct commands. They are not suggestions, they're not descriptors, they're actually commands. It's not saying, well, gee, I sure wish someone would take out the trash because it seems to be getting full and tomorrow is trash day. That's not an imperative. An imperative is when your dad says, take out the trash. Do it. Do it now. That's an imperative, okay? Here, before this chapter, whenever Solomon gives this advice of eat, drink, and be merry, they're not in the imperative voice. I forget what they're in, but it's not in the imperative. Here, however, it is. God is commanding you to do the following. Are you ready for it? Go, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. I'm not saying that if you're at work watching this, that you can just cut out and go and have some food and have some drink and spend it with your friends. Okay, you have responsibilities. You need to fulfill those responsibilities. But when you are free from your responsibilities, or when you have opportunity to do those enjoyable things, don't feel bad about them. Now, obviously, you shouldn't be doing sinful things, okay? You can't go to the local brothel because Solomon told you to go and enjoy life, okay? No, you're violating a commandment. There is not a commandment about eating and drinking with joy, okay? All right? So go do it with a merry heart. The best sort of, well, not there yet. Okay, let's read the rest of this section, and then we'll come back to the example that we have of Jesus doing this very thing for people, okay? So God has said, go eat, drink, be merry, and that go and enjoy and drink and eat, those are imperatives. They're direct commands of God in the Hebrew, which is incredible, and we don't see that in very many places. Verse 8, let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. So Jewish people, ancient people, would anoint their head, their hair with oil when they had a special event. It's just what they did, okay? It was a common thing that people did. People, when they go out, the women put on perfume, right? Okay, get dressed up. That's what he's talking about here. White garments were usually reserved for the wealthy because the expense of making them white and then the expense of keeping them white. So it was considered something for only special occasions. So he's saying, go out and have a night out in the town is basically what Solomon is telling you to do, what God is telling you to do from Solomon's own words. Verse 9, enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. So you're going to have to work, and work sucks. But enjoy what you have. Enjoy the food, enjoy the drink, enjoy nights out with friends, and enjoy being married. That's okay. It's good. God created these things, and they are gifts that he wants you to enjoy. And that gift of marriage is where it's going to lead us to how Jesus combines all of these things together in a second. Verse 10, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. Give it your all. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol. That is the place of the dead. So once you die, it's over, to which you are going. Now, yes, Solomon again is assuming that there's an afterlife. But here he's saying, it's okay. God has given you this life. You can enjoy this. You don't have to live either for this life and then eschew the next, or live for the next life and eschew the first. He's saying you can do both. You can live with an eye towards eternity and a hope for eternity, an expectation of eternity, and also have a balanced view of this world, that yes, there's terrible things in this world, and yes, it's upside down, and yes, it's full of injustice, but there's also good things. And of the simplest are food and drink and times with friends and family. It's incredible command from God through Solomon's wisdom for us today. So let me just talk about verse 9 here for a second. Enjoy life with the wife, singular, whom you love, all the days of your vain life. Now, if this author is Solomon, and I do believe it's absolutely Solomon, it's kind of unique that he says, enjoy life with the singular spouse, wife. The dude had 1,000 wives and concubines, all right? And here he says, you know what? It would have been better to just have one like God intended. This may also be the whole purpose for Solomon's writing the book of Songs, okay? Because in Song of Solomon, he talks about his love for one woman. He's not talking about the many different wives, like, wife A has beautiful ears, and wife B has beautiful hands, okay? He's not going down the list and talking about their wonderful qualities and how much he loves them each in their own way. No. Song of Solomon is from one to one. It's written that way. And this may be the purpose, is Solomon saying, you know what, I should have just did what God intended and had one wife. So it's unique that he writes it this way. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all right? So here we have these commands to eat, drink, be merry, be with friends, and also enjoy marriage. All of that comes to play in the gospel with Jesus. Jesus at the wedding at Cana. So let's jump to John chapter 2, and we're going to see all these things at play, okay? And something else that's going to pop up later in Ecclesiastes for us. John 2, verse 1. On the third day, there was a wedding. Third day, coincidence? No, always about Easter. There was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you," because his mom knew that he was going to do something, even though he said, "It's really not my time to do this." But, and don't assume that this woman here is disrespectful. Jesus is just distancing himself a little bit, but it's still a respectful term, okay? Also kind of curious is Jesus is there with 12 of his friends. Now, to invite the community would be normal, all right? But there is a really good possibility that the reason why Jesus is there with his disciples, and also why his mother is concerned about the provisions for the guests, is because this was actually a family wedding, and it might have been one of Jesus's siblings. I do believe that Jesus had siblings, okay? Biological children of Mary and Joseph, okay? I do believe that. And so Mary is concerned because it's part of her responsibility. And that's just my opinion and the opinion of my professors that I followed and where I got that from. I trust them as well. But I do think that's interesting. And a third day, again, Easter, we're white to a wedding. Jesus clothing was dazzling white. The angels wore white. All right, the women go to the tomb early in the morning. It all smacks of wedding imagery too. So much is patterned after marriage. Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Okay, so you can do the math there, and you can figure out that that's a lot of wine. Okay. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill up the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then when people have drunk freely, that's when people are 3 sheets to the wind, then they bring out the poor wine, because they can't tell the difference anyway. But you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. All right. So here, the thing that you have to remember is not only that Jesus is providing wine, so there's really nothing that you can talk about like that Jesus didn't, that Jesus was against the drinking of alcohol. He drank alcohol. He requires alcohol for the sacrament. And here he makes a lot more alcohol for people who had already drank the family out of their supply for the entire week. Okay? These feasts lasted for a while. And families planned for them. So it's kind of like when you invite a bunch of Wisconsinites over because what you thought was going to be enough beer doesn't turn out to be enough beer. That's happened. Or when a bunch of Lutherans descend for a pastor's conference and the hotel bar is just not ready for that. Okay? So these people had planned for this. So the people at the feast were presumably pretty well lubricated with wine at this point, okay? And Jesus doesn't say, well, they don't really need any more. They're happy enough, or I'll make a little bit. No, Jesus makes an abundance, and it's not just stuff that they can't even tell the difference. This is the best wine ever. And that gives us a picture of how Jesus provides. He provides more than we need, and he provides better than we require. That's what he does, okay? And he does that with him, who himself is, right? That's what he does himself. He gives us all that forgiveness that is more than we need and better than we ever expected. And he doesn't like tell these people, well, they need to drink in moderation. Like, okay, they've had enough. Let's have some grape juice now. It's not what's going on here. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that God condones drunkenness. He certainly does condemn that in the scripture. But responsible consumption of alcohol, responsible consumption of food at feasts, of devoting your time to celebrations with people, and not eschewing, that's my word for today, not scorning your job and your responsibilities and your health and your risk to others. As long as you can keep all those things in balance, this is a good thing. And Jesus condones it. And Solomon, way back here, gives the command directly from God that you should go and do it when you have opportunity. So that's really kind of unique and wonderful in Ecclesiastes here. So let your garments be white, wedding. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Good gussied up tradition, I guess, for Israelites. So get dressed up, go out, eat, drink, be merry, that sort of thing. And when you come home, enjoy your family, right? Enjoy marriage, those sorts of things. These are the best things that God has to provide. And in this life, they are among the primary things to enjoy and give thanks to God. So now that he's said those sort of things, he's going to come back to what life is like. So it kind of, we started on a downer. We kind of go up to the pinnacle of eat, drink, be merry. And now Solomon in fine Ecclesiastes tradition is going to bring us back down a little bit. We don't want to be too elated here because we still have to live in this life with all these sorts of things. One last thing. Oh, I almost forgot. Whatever one finds to do it with all your might. Okay? This is the Lutheran understanding of vocation, that God gives you certain things to do, that is your responsibility, and that's part of the way in which you serve your neighbor and also part of the way in which you enjoy life. Yes, work is toil, right? It is, but there are joyful things in this life, and that's why this life is worth living. But notice that these things, bread is not just grown out in the fields. Loaves of bread don't just get picked off of stalks, okay? That the wheat has to be harvested, it has to be milled, it has to be baked, okay? There's people involved in that process who are doing their jobs, doing their vocations. Same with wine. Wine takes harvesting, wine takes preparation, wine takes time, right? Same thing with oil, okay? Harvesting, preparation. So there's people involved in this whose job it is to produce those sorts of things. They're toiling, but they, through their toil, produce enjoyment. And the same thing is true about all of us. We have enjoyment in what we do, even if the process isn't always enjoyable, okay? So we should find satisfaction in our vocation, whatever that vocation is. As Solomon says here, whatever your hand finds to do, so whatever is in front of you, do it with your might, right? So, and through that process, you produce enjoyment for other people and also probably for yourself, if nothing else, for a satisfaction of just fulfilling your vocation, whatever that vocation might be. So work, play, eat, drink, be merry, those sorts of things. What a wonderful command from God. Don't forget your responsibilities. Don't think that life should be full of that, because it's not, and you're just going to be disappointed. But when it's there, remember, enjoy God's gifts and take life as it comes. It's okay, right? Wonderful advice for us. Back to the text. Here we come back down a little bit. Verse 11. Again, I saw that under the sun, that is in this life, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all. This is a reiteration of what we had up here, right? That everything, the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked. So time and chance, there is no such thing as chance, right? Happen to them all. For man does not know his time. So a human being who's simply living life doesn't know if what's going on right now is going to be favorable and enjoyable for him in the next hour or the next day or the next year, or if it's going to be the other way, if it's going to all turn south, or if something terrible is going to happen. We don't know that. We don't have that foresight. We're just going through life as it comes to us. We don't know what the big picture is. And Solomon is saying it doesn't turn out like we think it will all the time. Time and chance happen to them all, and man does not know time. They're like fish that are just swimming around, and an evil net is let down and scoops them up. Somebody gets hit by a car, or struck by lightning, or they get a disease, or whatever it happens to be. It doesn't seem to have a rhyme or a reason. It just happens. Or like birds that are caught in a snare. They think they're going after something good, and then it turns out to be evil. So the children of man are snared at an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them. You are at the mercy of a world that is against you because of sin. It's our own fault, but that's how we exist. And so all you can do is just trust God to watch over you, trust God to handle the after this life, trust God to work all things for your good here and now and there and then. That's the only thing you can do. And that's been the message of Solomon throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. Man does not know his time. This is something that really helps me understand Jesus' words in many other places in the Bible. Okay, it was actually in John 2, for instance, but it's also in John 7. So John 7, Jesus is at the Feast of Booths, a traditional Jewish feast. Jesus kept the traditional Jewish feasts because he was a Jew. After this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Now the Jews' Feast of Booths was at hand. So his brothers, and actually you look at this note, I don't know if it pop up. Here it includes both genders. You could have brothers and sisters. It's sometimes translated. Now, those are his disciples. Those are his cousins. Like, oh yeah, well, sure. But they might also have been his biological siblings. Said to him, leave here and go to Judea that your disciples, so his brothers talk about his disciples. Well, probably not his disciples then. So who are his brothers? Probably his biological siblings. Sorry, I have an opinion about that. May also see the works that you're doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. So you're doing these miracles, go show other people and they'll believe in you. For not even his brothers believed in him. They were mocking him. Jesus said to them, my time has not yet come, but your time is always here. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it that its works are evil. Notice the parallels with Solomon's language here. You go up to the feast. I am not going up to this feast, for my time has not yet fully come. Isn't that interesting? My time has not yet fully come. So what we can't know Man does not know his time. Jesus does know as true man and true God. He can see what is beneficial and what is not. And so when Jesus says to his mother, my hour has not yet come, he's telling her this really isn't how things are going to play out. It's not really going to have the benefit that you think it's going to have. So maybe that's why he does it in such secretive manner, although he does a lot of things secretively, right? We'll see why he does that at the end of our Ecclesiastes, why Jesus doing things in secret is often the wiser course of action. But it has to do with him knowing the times that we can't know as human beings, but he knows as God. So again, we trust our times in his hands, and that's all we can really do. Verse 13, I have also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. Solomon is now going to recount, it seems to be a historical event that he witnessed. There is a parallel in the scripture about his grandfather or his great uncle, I think it's Joab, who goes to a town and he's seeking one person, and rather than destroy the whole town, there's a wise woman in the town who says, why don't we just give up this guy? They do, and one man spares the whole town. That doesn't seem to be the exact event that Solomon is talking about here, because he gets some of the details wrong. And so I don't think that this is the event that he's talking about. But what we do see is a pattern where a wise person has done something that has spared their life for the life of others. Okay? Solomon doesn't tell us who he's talking about, and we're not given many details. All he says is, verse 14, there was a little city with a few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor, wise man, and he, by his wisdom, delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. So Solomon here doesn't tell us who the poor man was. He doesn't tell us who the city was. He doesn't tell us who the great king was. He just says this is what happened. What he sets up is this city is going to perish. There is no hope for it against these ginormous siege works of this great king for this small city. But one poor man who had a bit of wisdom, and remember, wisdom is knowing God and his will. That is Solomon's underlying theme of everything about wisdom, that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? So that poor man delivers the whole city. How? The only thing that we're told is he does it by his wisdom. And you almost wonder, like, I want to know, Solomon, what is that? And Solomon goes, well, go seek wisdom and you might figure it out. It's kind of what he does there. But his point is that wisdom can actually accomplish great things. So faith in God and adherence to his will and an understanding of that will and how it practically plays out, or a simple resignation to let God be in control of things, can defeat even an army, a besieging army. And he says that in verse 16. I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard. So even if it's just the man that's not even remembered for what he did, not even acknowledged for what he did, it's possible that the king or the mayor of that city claimed the victory for himself, but Solomon knows that it was actually the advice of this wise man who doesn't even get recorded in history. He's saying that it's worth it. And that's what leads us into this sort of closing out here. The words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. The words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. So I said, if you're a countercultural type of person, this is going to speak to you because you know that you should not trust anything that's popular, right? If all these people are talking about this new song, this new band, American Top 40, whatever it happens to be, this new show that you just got to watch, most of the time, if you're, kind of a countercultural bent, you're like, no, I think I'm going to avoid that. There are bands that I still don't listen to because they were sellouts and they were popular when I was in high school. Like how ridiculous is that I'm still holding on to that, but it's so much a part of who I am. I can't bear to listen to that. But I still have the distrust of anything that's popular. Although sometimes you grow and you learn too. You get wisdom, you discern things, right? But I think the wisdom here prevails that in general, be wary of loud crowds. It's generally not a good idea. What they're clamoring about probably isn't something that's entirely accurate. What they're enthralled about probably isn't something that's good, righteous, and holy. What they're concerned about probably isn't really the thing that you should be concerned about, and what they're focusing on may not be the thing that you should be focusing on. This leads us to the news. So Solomon's advice in all these places is just be wary of the popular stuff, and especially when it's loud, because he's saying that what's often wise is spoken by poor men in small towns that don't even get credit for it. That's the example that he laid out. And so if we apply that today of saying that wisdom is always going to be in the minority, righteousness, faithfulness is going to be in the minority, and it's not going to look like it's supposed to. And that's Jesus again. Jesus didn't look like the Savior he was supposed to. That's what people thought. So that's why so many missed him. It's why so many miss him today. So the words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. So take license from God to be a little bit countercultural and not give in to whatever is popular and meet it with a certain level of Generation X disdain and distrust and go from there. It's okay. It's vindication for all of us born in that generation. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Yeah, you can have that wise man and he can do all these great things, but it just takes one wicked person to undo it all. The damage done by sin and evil is so much greater than the good that is done by wisdom. Solomon returns this sort of depressing resignation of life and his saying, like, this is what is so unjust about everything. It kind of gets a little bit tedious that Solomon starts off sad, gets really, really happy and elated and gives you this great joy, and then has to bring it and temper it back down. I warn our vicars about preaching this way, about law and gospel, that they tell us we're sinners and we're going to hell and we're bad and all that. And then they give us this beautiful gospel. Jesus died for you. Jesus loves you. He chose you. He forgets all your sin. And then they have a tendency to pull a Solomonic twist at the end and say, but you're still a miserable sinner. Like, no, you could have just left that little part off and let me go home happy and elated. I know my sin. So I often tell them, you just got to chop that off and let the gospel stand on its own, right? It's not going to make us pretend that we don't have sin. We're going to hear that next time we come. But so Solomon gives and then he takes away. He does that throughout, and it can get tedious. But that's part of the process, I think, because that's life, isn't it? It's the ups and downs. So even in the writing of Solomon's Ecclesiastes, there's ups and downs in there. It's like this part is good, and this part's really sad, and this part is good, and up and down. You have to learn how to take the good with the bad. You have to learn how to focus on the good and enjoy that when you have it. And then when the bad comes, just to kind of say, well, this isn't the end of all things. This will pass. It's in the way he writes Ecclesiastes. It's giving us an example of how to go through life just by going through the chapters of the book. And so Solomon is a master at teaching through doing, and you don't even realize that you're learning how to do it. So here in the center of chapter 9, we have this beautiful command. And again, Hebrews often put the most important part, the thing he wanted you to focus on, right here in the middle, right? And that's what we have, this enjoy life. Go eat your bread with joy. Drink your wine with a merry heart. God has approved what you do. He's commanding you. It's actually through a command given to us through the words of Solomon, Ecclesiastes. It's an imperative. Go and do this. God speaks the same way when he says, go and make disciples of all nations by baptizing them and teaching them, right? Go eat, drink, and be merry. So we have all of that came together. And one sinner destroys much good. Guess what? We're all sinners. And yet God still provides. God still gives us bread and wine and time with friends and families and enjoyment in this life. So what do? Take life as it comes. Enjoy God's gifts while they're there. For the rest of it, let God do the work. And then, maybe have less, want less, because the things you own end up owning you, right? So maybe it's better to just be simple, be a poor man in a no-name town, but have some wisdom and enjoy your daily bread. Not saying that God commands minimalism or anything like that, or asceticism. He's saying you can enjoy what God gives you, whether that's little or much. And in the end, God will make all things right. And in the end, you will have everything, because you'll have a new heaven and a new earth with the God whom you love and the God who loves you. So if you needed any justification for having a feast today, you just got it through Ecclesiastes chapter 9. Hope that makes you feel good. God bless you, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.